Israel just dismantled decades of land restrictions in Judea and Samaria. At the same time, terrorists collecting Palestinian Authority blood money are about to be deported, and a Lebanon-directed terror cell was caught preparing an attack inside Israel. Those three developments aren't isolated headlines. They are pieces of a single, accelerating shift. Israel is moving from managing the conflict to redefining the map. Deterrence and sovereignty will hopefully become policy. These stories and much more up next on Judeacation. Welcome back to Judeacation here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I am in Jerusalem at the JNS Media Hub. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with some earth-shattering news. The Israeli cabinet this week approved a series of measures aimed at deepening Jerusalem's hold on Judea and Samaria and expanding Jewish communities in the region. The decisions promoted by Defense Minister Israel Katz and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich are expected to bring about far-reaching changes to land acquisition rules in Judea and Samaria. The approved measures include lifting confidentiality from land registry records, canceling historic restrictions on land sales to non-Arabs, and abolishing the requirement for prior approval of transactions. In other words, up until now, only a Jordanian citizen could buy or sell land in Judea and Samaria, and non-Arabs could not purchase land. In short, Jews could not buy land from Arabs. Even more so, the PA, which of course attacked the Israeli cabinet's decision, maintains a death penalty for anyone who sells real estate to Jews. Why haven't any college students in the U.S. ever demonstrated against the PA for literally sentencing to death any Arab who sells land to Jews? Complete crickets. These useful idiots don't protest against the Iranian regime or the PA, just against Israel. So what does this cabinet ruling really mean? This week, I had the pleasure of speaking to Israel Gans, the governor of the Binyamin Regional Council and the chairman of the Eshel Council. He told me the cabinet decision means anyone can now buy land in Judea and Samaria, as in other parts of the world. Until now, Gans explained, under Ottoman law, as administered through Jordanian legal frameworks, only Jordanian citizens could purchase land in Judea and Samaria, as Israeli law had not been fully applied there. And that's been the real problem. Israeli law is not fully extended to Judea and Samaria. Military law, yes. Now, going back to Gans, he said, practically speaking, I met many Arabs who wanted to sell land but could not do so to non-Arabs. Investors from abroad were also unable to purchase land. Now, that has been changed. We want to develop, said Gans, commercial and industrial zones, health systems, and more. It's a huge opportunity for investors. Now is the time, he added. Gans characterized the move as another step towards applying Israeli law to Judea and Samaria. Also, according to Gans, additional cabinet decisions focused on combating what he termed environmental terrorism, including illegal garbage burning by Palestinian Authority residents. Citing a Ministry of Health report, he said the practice contributes to more than 1,000 Israeli deaths annually. 1,000. Listen, folks, we've talked about environmental terrorism many times, but this is the first time I've heard that number. 1,000 people, 1,000 Israelis die annually because of health problems attributed to air pollution as a result of these illegal fires. That's mind-blowing. Those numbers are insane. A third component of the cabinet decision addresses safeguarding Jewish archaeological sites throughout Judea and Samaria, including in Area A, which is under full Palestinian Authority control. Gans said such sites have long faced desecration and theft. This is another topic we've discussed on this show, archaeological terrorism. So this is huge news, and it's most welcomed. Folks, slowly, more and more, it is trending towards sovereignty or Israeli law being applied to Judea and Samaria. Notice I didn't say annexation. You don't need to annex something that is yours. Israel won a defensive war of survival in 1967 and re-administered control over our ancient biblical heartland. Of course, governments all over the world, from the EU to Canada and others, condemned this week's cabinet decisions. UNRWA also issued a condemnation, despite the fact that UNRWA, as we know, is the humanitarian wing of Hamas. As I've said many, many times, hashtag UNRWA is Hamas. Of course, Jews can live in Paris or Toronto or London, but God forbid Jews should be able to live or have property rights in a place called Judea. So these condemnations were expected, for sure. What's the bottom line here? Judea and Samaria is part of the state of Israel. More and more is happening now to make that 100% official. Let's hope for some more good news as we go forward. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15th to the 17th at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Jerusalem. Register today at jns-summit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV. That's JNSTV, one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem. Moving on, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week signed papers to revoke the Israeli citizenship of 2 Arab terrorists and have them deported. This is the first ever implementation of a law passed by a majority of 94 of the 120 members in Knesset back in 2023. The terrorists to be deported are both from Jerusalem: Mahmoud Ahmad, who was sentenced to 23 years in prison in 2001 for a string of shooting attacks, and Muhammad Ahmad Hussein Halsim, who was sentenced to 18 years in 2016 for stabbing 2 elderly women in the capital's Armon HaNatziv neighborhood. Both of them received funds from the Palestinian Authority during their imprisonment. As you hopefully know by now, the PA pays Arabs on a sliding scale based on how many Jews they murder. The more carnage, the more money they make. What's interesting here is that these 2 terrorists slated to be deported have Israeli citizenship. Did that bother the PA? Of course not. Just the opposite. It seems they have no problem allocating blood money towards Arabs who live in Jerusalem and hold Israeli citizenship. Now, from what I understand, under the law, Israel will deport them from Jerusalem to PA-controlled areas, either in Judea and Samaria or perhaps even to Gaza. To me, that's not enough. These people need to be deported far away. I'm not sure how that would be done, and I don't know if any countries would be willing to take them. And why is that? Because they would rather these terrorists be kept in Israel so they can go back to carrying out attacks. Just like no countries around the world stepped up, none of them wanted to take in so-called civilians from Gaza. They would rather keep them there on the front lines against Israel. I doubt any countries would want to take in these known terrorists. The bottom line here, Israel needs to establish policies which create true deterrence. If that's deportation, then great. But would-be terrorists need to think twice when they wake up in the morning. They need to rationalize that it's just not worth it to try to murder Jews. And that, folks, could save lives. Moving on here, the Israeli security agency, the Shin Bet, said this week it had uncovered a Lebanon-directed 5-man terrorist cell that had been operating in the Samaria region. The agency said the network was instructed to photograph an Israeli community in Samaria, and it conducted weapons training in preparation for a planned attack. The Shin Bet, as part of their investigations and intelligence gathering operations, discovered that the network leader was a Lebanese national with ties to both Hamas and the Hezbollah terrorist organizations. Indictments have been filed against the 5 operatives, according to the Shin Bet. They said it would continue working to thwart any attempts to promote terrorist activity against Israel, its residents, and its citizens. So first of all, thank God this cell was discovered. As we know, there have been many other attempts by terrorists abroad to assist in launching attacks against Israel and Israelis. In this case, Lebanon, but you have attacks planned from Iran and other countries. And of course, you have the weapons smuggling into Judea and Samaria via Jordan. Some of those weapons reach Arabs with Israeli citizenship throughout the country. Thank God for our security services, our army, border police, others, and of course, God above, who are working on many fronts to keep the people of Israel safe. Moving on, the Israel police this week closed 10 businesses and detained over 45 undocumented PA Arabs illegally working in Israel proper. This happened during a large-scale operation across the coastal district last Sunday. This according to Israeli police and their spokesperson unit. The operation, which targeted the employment of individuals entering Israel without valid permits, involved inspections of more than 120 businesses. The raids focused on hubs in Haifa, Wadi Ara, Zichron Yaakov, and the Krayot, which is near Haifa. Check out this video. The problem is it starts with illegal workers and then spreads into terrorism. As you just saw, the so-called security barrier doesn't really stop illegals from coming over. We should have learned on October the 7th that walls and fences are not the solution. Enough band-aids, folks, on our problems. Only through real deterrence, as we talked about before, along with the work of our security forces, which stop over 90% of attacks, can things turn around. But these illegal infiltrations are a major, major power keg, which starts with crimes but never ends with just criminal activities. And finally, my new friend Gideon Israel penned an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this past week. He discussed how U.S. lawmakers in at least a dozen states and in both houses of Congress are advancing legislation to restore the original names, Judea and Samaria, in official U.S. documents. In other words, no more of this nonsense, West Bank. No more made-up terminology, with the goal of erasing the historical, biblical, and legal rights of the Jewish people to these areas. As Gideon Israel says, to see only the West Bank is to view a sterile, geopolitical entity, a narrow strip of land defined by 20th century skirmishes and modern conflict. Judea and Samaria, areas south and north of Jerusalem that are frequently named together, helps transform the landscape into a heritage, reminding the visitor that he or she is standing where Abraham received the promise and the patriarchs purchased land in Hebron and Shechem. This is the cradle of Western monotheism. By replacing the West Bank with Judea and Samaria, American lawmakers are doing more than making a geopolitical statement. They are affirming a worldview rooted in biblical record while fighting the erasure of the foundations upon which Western civilization is built. Check out the entire article in the Wall Street Journal. And that does it for this week's Judeacation. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News. I am in Jerusalem at the JNS Media Hub here in the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I want to give a shout out to the people behind the scenes here at JNS TV. Aaron Wogelanter, who's working the board, Ryan Lishitz, our producer Esther Eden, Yuri Svretsky, station manager, and Zach Sickerman. Make sure you go to JNS TV for all the amazing content which JNS provides. Give us a super thanks, and go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. We'll see you next week on Judeacation. Have a great week, everybody.